Reporting in the Satellite Center, Tiffany Teasley, Fox 35 News.
We're talking with Rod Wheeler. He's a former homicide investigator and really invaluable to us on stories like this. Rod, let me ask you this. The defense released these tapes, but haven't they now essentially tied their client to a version of the events that if he sways from this, even the tiniest bit, it could be devastating in court?
Well, you know, the thing is, Bob, everything that George Zimmerman has said up to this point, including the interviews that he gave to the police investigators, is clearly going to come up in somebody's courtroom at some point when this case goes to trial. Now, just so that the viewers understand, there's two things that's really critical in this case. One is consistency of George Zimmerman's story. Yeah. That's going to be huge in this case. His story has to match up. In addition to that, George Zimmerman's credibility. Now, keep in mind that the consistency of his story should match the facts and evidence, the forensic evidence that was found on the scene. And I think that's the angle that the prosecution is going to come from, Bob. What I believe is that the prosecution is going to try to show that what Mr. Zimmerman has said is not accurate when it comes to matching it up to the actual physical evidence. So I think all of these things is going to come out in trial when it gets to that point, Bob.
You know, Rod, you mentioned the credibility. I was going to get to this later, but I'll get to it now. Do you think these recent bond hearing tapes where he and his wife were obviously trying to hide the fact that they had a lot of money, his credibility has taken a hit now, is that going to play up in court?
I think that will clearly be a part of the argument that the prosecution is going to make. I mean, let's face it. I mean, this case with George Zimmerman is really going to be all about credibility. And one of the worst things a defendant can do in any kind of case, especially a homicide case, is to lie to the judge, because that's going to come up in a subsequent trial. So I think that definitely will play a significant role as far as the final determination of this case, Bob.
And you know, Rod, it all comes down to who started this fight. Trayvon can't say that George did it. He's no longer with us. Is it reasonable to believe George Zimmerman's story that he was ambushed and was stalked, if you will, the way he's telling the story, stalked by Trayvon, who really had nothing but Skittles and a thing of iced tea in his hands?
Well, here, let me just put it like this. Many years of investigating homicide cases just like this, Bob, I can tell you that the first thing that I listened for in this case was the homicide investigators, a guy named Seriano, his version of what he interpreted. And I'll tell you, I put a lot of credence behind what that guy said, because Seriano is an experienced, seasoned detective. He's not a new guy out of the academy. So when Seriano first made the recommendation that George Zimmerman should be prosecuted for homicide, I kind of went down that same path, because this guy knows exactly what he was looking at. He was on the scene. He saw the facts and evidence. And I'll tell you, he was very skeptical about Mr. Zimmerman's story, Bob.
I'll quote him directly. He said, "A lot of people don't think that your injuries are consistent with getting into a life-threatening type thing." He saw the injuries. He called them scratches on the back of the head and the broken nose. He didn't buy it. He did not buy the story that George Zimmerman was selling that night.
That's right.
All right.
He didn't buy it at all. And the only reason he didn't buy it, Bob, is because, like I said, this guy's experienced. He's seen many cases like this, and Zimmerman's story, Bob, simply was just not adding up.
Rod, we appreciate you spending some time with us. We'll keep your number on speed dial. We'll be calling you. You can count on that.
Thank you, Bob. Appreciate it.
A crime alert tonight. Crooks stalking